Hello everyone, welcome back to Bexhill West. I'm James. Now for today's video we're going to do something a little bit different to the format that I would currently do. And it all involves this rather beautiful drawing that's pinned up behind me. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Now one of the things that people have commented on in my previous videos is that they've picked up on the fact that I like to do quite a lot of research before I set about making a model. And that's true. I try to, as far as I can, be as accurate as I can be. And recently I've made some mistakes, and perhaps we'll show some of those in a future video. Anyway, for now, and for today's video, I want to focus on this drawing behind me, which shows a Sussex Waggon. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why on earth is he doing a Sussex Waggon? What's all this about? Well, quite simply, you may recall previously in videos that I had made the goods shed for Bexhill West. Now I don't at this stage have any plans to model the entire goods yard. It would take far more space than I've got and probably more time than I have to devote to it. However, I am going to build like a smaller diorama with the building set into its surroundings so we can kind of get a feel for how it may have looked back in the day. And I was keen that that would be modelled in such a way that it would reflect when the station and the line first opened. So we're looking very early 20th century, 1905 to 1910, something like that probably, sort of pre-First World War. And so I was thinking, what would I use, what props would I use to sort of furnish the goods shed? Now I'm quite interested in the idea of the progressiveness of transportation and how other forms of transportation were kind of pushed out of the way by the coming of the railways, and this was the case at Bexhill West to a degree, and again we'll talk more about it later, but certainly some of the certain sort of I suppose commercial activities and particularly agricultural activities changed upon the arrival of the railway at Bexhill, and also changed when the railway left as well. So I thought it would be quite nice to incorporate within this, you know, brand new goods shed for the new railway as it opened. It'd be quite nice to sort of doff the cap, if you like, to what had gone before. And I was very keen to include some sort of horse-drawn vehicle and ideally a Sussex horse-drawn wagon. Now I've been doing some research, and the outcome of that research is this drawing behind me. Now this drawing in particular is particularly special because it has links to other places locally to me down here in the southeast, but especially to Bodiam. And as Bodiam Station is the subject of something else that this channel's been interested in, I thought this would make an excellent example for a model to go at Bexhill West, but also an interesting subject in its own right to study. So that's the purpose of this video, is to share with you this really fascinating sort of archived material that I've got behind me, and talk a little bit more about how I might go about creating that in miniature, what the processes would be, and just have a look at it. Now I understand this is a change. Many of you perhaps have tuned in now or have subscribed because you're keen to see me building the next bit of this kind of the Bexhill West Railway. So this isn't railway related, so if that's not your thing, then do please skip on and come back for another video. Although I'd prefer it obviously if you didn't. I think this is fascinating, and it's really going to add, I hope, an extra dimension to what I'm trying to do with Bexhill West. So I hope it takes your fancy. So before we get into it, I'll just point out that this drawing that I'm going to show you is not a generic drawing of the type of wagon that is commonly referred to as a Sussex wagon. It is an accurate, measured study of a particular wagon. And the original wagon was sold to the Guinness family, who owned sort of farmland in the Bodiam area, where hop growing was, was the agricultural crop of choice for beer making and what have you. The wagon itself was made by a local wheelwright. the harnesses for the horses were all produced by a local saddler, and I've got the names of all of those people. So we could do a little bit of research. We can find out exactly where this wagon was made, where the various people who contributed towards building it were located themselves, and learn a little bit about its story. Now, the wagon itself ended its life in East Guildford on the Romney Marsh, not a million miles away from where I'm sat now. So it really is a local wagon, and it's, as I say, an exact measured study of a real wagon. Now, Sussex Waggon was very typical in Kent, Sussex, or East Sussex and West Sussex, although the West Sussex wagons, to my understanding, typically had bodies that were removable or would lift up, whereas the East Sussex, or the Kent and East Sussex wagon, I suppose we could say, was a fixed body. So this is a fixed bodied, wide-wheeled wagon that we're going to have a look at. Now, I will say now I don't know anything about these things, so I'm really no expert at all. And the real reason for making the video is that I hope that there may well be some experts on the other end of my camera lens who might be able to fill me in with some more details. Now, this is going to be the subject of a much bigger modelling study that's going to come along in the new year, but I thought today we'd just have a little look at it, float the idea out there, see if anybody else has any information about this particular wagon. And I wouldn't mind betting there are some photographs somewhere of Guinness's farm in Bodiam, with this thing loaded up with whatever it carted. I'm sure that's probably the case. Anyway, let's have a look at the drawing itself. So before we get into some close-ups of this drawing, I just thought it was worth me standing beside it to give you an idea of the scale of this thing. It's 5 feet long, just over 3 feet wide. It really is a magnificent piece of work. I consider this to be like a piece of artwork. Now, years ago, before I got into CAD and everything else, I studied architectural drawing practice, and I learned how to draw buildings using Indian ink and drafting film and drawing boards and T-squares and what have you, which is exactly how this drawing has been produced originally. And the detail and the quality in it is really first class. What I find most impressive is all the stenciled lettering. Now, that can be quite a mind-numbing job on a drawing board, keeping it all beautifully spaced, and the people who produced this drawing have done a really first class job. Anyway, let's get into it. I'll show you some close-ups, and I'll just discuss with you how maybe some of the details on this drawing will affect how I go about making this as a model. When I set out to make a model, I'm really interested in learning, firstly, how the thing was built, be that a building or a machine or whatever it might be. And in this case, I'm really interested in not only how this was built, but why it was designed in the way in which it is. And a really interesting point is the steering mechanism. So the wagon's front axle was essentially like a solid beam that swiveled around a centre point. And so, of course, those wheels, as they rotated, they moved through an arc, and the drawing shows them here and here as dashed lines. And we can see how the framework of this Sussex wagon has been wasted in order that the wheels can turn and cut into the bodywork. So the bodywork itself is also similarly wasted to allow for this. Now, this sort of thing is fascinating to know, and this is why I don't want just any old wagon pulled up outside the goods shed at Bexhill West. I want it to be a Sussex wagon, and that's a really important detail to bear in mind. Now, this drawing is full of all sorts of fascinating information, and just whilst we're here, there are 4 mortises shown on this front timber beam, and I was studying the drawing. I wondered what they were for. Well, fortunately, the notes on the drawing explain exactly what they're for. And if I zoom out a little bit, and we'll come down slightly, we could see that they correspond with this line that's drawn here, numbered 54. And it turns out that poles will have been put into these holes, and they would have helped stop any loads, big loads, imagine this loaded up with hay, from kind of riding forward and falling off the front of the cart if you were going downhill. Now, just down here, you can see some little handles, and they reminded me of the handles that you might find on a bench vise, and I wondered what they were for. And again, the drawing tells me, and it's sort of slightly related to these wooden poles numbered 54, in that these handles are sat on a cross shaft that ran across the back of the wagon, and ropes and bindings could be lashed over the load and run down to here, and then this acted kind of like a winch, and you could wind these handles and tighten the bindings down to keep the load secure. Now, I hadn't thought about how you would load this, and if I was making a model I'd probably throw some little bits of rope over the sides or whatever, but now I know that, I can now make a model designed with a big load on, and it's all being winched up with this little thing here. There's a couple of other details on this this particular view that are of interest. So on the back of the wagon, suspended from these chains, is this little device, which I've just found out was dropped behind the wheel, and this would act as a kind of a brake and stop the wagon rolling backwards downhill. And of course it kind of rolled, it spun on a little axle on its little carrying frame, so presumably if you were going uphill you would tow this along, and this would just roll along behind the hind wheel, and I'm guessing if you needed to pause, the horses needed a rest or whatever, the wagon could then just settle back and this would act like a little chock. Now, it's a small detail, but it's something I'd never have known unless I had access to a drawing of this nature. Now, this is my summation of what this device is, and I'm not an expert. Others may be able to correct me there, but I think that's what that is. Similarly, there's a little paddle here, which hung on the near side of the wagon, and it's my understanding that this could be removed and slipped underneath the wheel and used as a kind of a rudimentary brake to slow, or to sort of add some friction to slow the wagon down when it's running downhill, so as not to kind of, I guess, push the horses forward as it rolls downhill. Let's look at some other details. So I was interested in this detail to the four-carriage. Here we can see the axle, we can see the iron stub axles extending into the wheels. We can see that there is some camber incorporated into the wheels to I guess help it sort of tow nice and straight. But it's nice to see the detail that would be added to the edges of the timber. Now, this sort of detail is important, and I'm going to be able to incorporate all of that precisely, knowing exactly how it goes. It's interesting, we can see how the horse towing this thing, is it towed or drawing? I suppose carts get drawn, don't they, not towed, but anyway we can see where the harnesses attach on whilst this thing is being drawn along. Really fascinating stuff, and again, the quality of the drawing really is the business. Now, whilst we're looking at this detail of the four-carriage, I was quite fascinated with this little toolbox. And if we look on the drawing, we can see it's numbered, number 47, and we look down number 47 on the side of the thing, and it's called a wagon box, and it tells me that's made of elm. So that's nice to know, and I'll try and, when this is built and painted, I'll try and make it look like it's a piece of elm. It's just another fascinating detail. Now, the drawing actually says what the paint finish of the whole wagon is, and it was all painted, but I think I might leave that as just a piece of polished wood, although admittedly in 4mm scale it's going to be tiny. However, before I make a 4mm scale version, I will draw this thing out in 3D CAD, and I will draw it full size and then scale it down to 4mm. So when I've got my full size CAD model, I will be able to render that as a piece of elm quite easily. Another detail on this drawing which I find equally fascinating is the detail to the wheels. Now, had I not have had access to this drawing, I would have been a little bit shy of just producing a generic wheel. I'd like a wheel to, have the right number of spokes and what have you. And we can model a lot of that just from photographs, but having access to this really is first class. I can see exactly how the wheel has been constructed. I can see that there is an offset of the I'm going to call it the rim. I don't know the correct words yet, but there's an offset from the rim and to the hub, and the spokes angle out diagonally. Now it's interesting, the drawing tells me that this is designed in this way to actually resist the sideways forces that the cart will experience when it's being towed along, or drawn I should say, by the horses. The action of the horses walking will tend to induce sideways loads through the frame of the wagon, and the spokes being angled like this help to kind of give a little bit of give or a bit of cushioning, because of course this is all made in timber, so it's going to have a little bit of movement to it, so that just gives a little bit of compliance to the structure, and I guess kind of rudimentary shock absorption in a way, but fascinating stuff. And again, I wouldn't have known it unless I had access to a drawing like this, or had, got a book at the library or something. But fascinating stuff. I should be able to make a model of this really quite accurately. And how I'll go about doing it is I will photograph each of these pieces, which is, in fact, that's the reason why I've got the plan pinned up as I have. I'll photograph this, I can put that into the computer, I can scale it from the scale on the sheet, the master scale, and then set about replicating this perfectly to scale. Now we'll finish up our examination of this drawing by looking at perhaps what's one of the most beautiful bits, and this is the section which shows how the wagon is attached to the horses that are going to draw it. Now this is of interest again, and it's the notes on the drawing which make this clear. And it says that when the wagon is being drawn by just one horse, the carter will lead the horse by the rein. Where there are two horses in use, then the carter will lead the horse, or the hind horse, and control the leading horse either by a rein or with a whip. And if there are three or four horses pulling the thing, then the carter's mate or boy led the hind horse, and again the rest were controlled with a whip. Now I wouldn't have known any of that, so when I come to put this model outside, or just arriving at Bexhill West to maybe drop something off, or who knows, maybe you're going to be picking something up, I haven't decided yet, I can make sure that the carter will be leading the horse appropriately. So I'm not sure how I'm going to go about making suitable horses. Hopefully I'll be able to buy something that will work, but I'll try and have, I think, at least two horses, and we'll have the carter leading him from the back here. Now the drawing also shows the, I don't know what you call it, the saddlery, the harness arrangements for the horses in great detail. I'm sure I couldn't make an actual harness from this stuff, but certainly there's enough here to make a good quality model from. Now what's interesting is that the saddler who made the harness for this particular cart was a gentleman by the name of Harry Ovenden, and he was from Northiam. That's where he operated his saddlery business. But he also operated, he worked as a carter too, and ran horses himself. And later on he ran the local bus service, which serviced Northiam and Rye and Hastings and what have you up to, I believe, 1939. So it's quite interesting that Mr. Ovenden was himself a victim of changing times, in that he's had to move from horse-drawn transportation to the motor coach. And really this is another fascinating part of this particular wagon, but also interests me with regard to Bexhill West and that dynamic of how we move from one form of transportation to the next. So the fact that this drawing gives me that local connection is fascinating, and I will be looking up Mr. Ovenden. I'm sure if he ran a local bus service I can find out plenty about him. Now the blacksmith who made the wheels for this particular wagon, George Bartholomew, he was the village blacksmith in Northiam, which is just down the road from Bodiam. And the wheelwright was also from Northiam, a Walter Tedman. So I was going to look those guys up too, just try and create a model that hopefully will, well, hopefully the model will be quite good, it'll look nice outside my goods shed, but hopefully I can incorporate in producing these videos some of that extra information about these characters to help give a bit of life to it. And there we have it. This is the drawing, and this will be a project which is going to feature on the channel in the new year. Currently I have a week off from work, and one of the things I'm doing is getting loads of the content prepared that will be coming out in the new year, which on one hand seems a long way away, but knowing how busy I am, I know it's going to come around before I know it. So I'm trying to get ahead of the game a little bit. Now the channel itself is going to broaden out a little bit. I'm not just going to be making videos about Bexhill West, although that is that's the end goal. But things like this, which will be a complement to the Bexhill West project, I hope are fascinating in their own right. So I hope you've enjoyed this little look at something different. Now there are a few other different things in the pipeline, and I'll probably keep those for the new year. Until then, if you turned on wanting a railway video and you stuck with this, then my apologies. I hope you enjoyed it all the same. If you're new to the channel and you really don't know what this is all about, I like to make things in miniature. My main focus is the Bexhill West station, because anything else that's sort of vaguely associated with it is fair game for me. So if you've not already subscribed, please consider doing so. If you have any comments, any information about this wagon or anything else, remember, I'm not an expert, I don't know anything about this, so I'd really love to hear from you. Anyway, until next time, take care everyone. Bye bye.